Okay, so welcome today to CalCAPA's webinar on community needs assessments for boards. This training is put in the context of board member participation in the ROMA activities that we do at the agencies. So for those that are here on the call, just know that that's the intent. So if you're from a board and you're participating on a board, this will apply directly to you. If you're from the staff of an agency that supports the board, just know that this is put in that context, okay? I'm happy to answer questions all the way around community needs assessment. We'll just remember that this is in the context of board participation in that activity. So that's this one. My name is Lawrence Heiner. I'm the Director of Training and Technical Assistance at CalCAPA. We're your community action association here in Sacramento. The material that we're using today was generated by the National Partnership, which is our national support organization that helps agencies across the country. So what we're learning today is applicable across the nation as to what it is that we do in community action for community needs assessment. Okay. This particular webinar is one of several in a series, and we are pulling this one out of that series intentionally because of where we are right now in 2023 in our agency's activities as we work toward developing the community action plan that's due mid-year here. At the end of June, more specific, the year can be calculated a lot of different ways. So by the end of June, community needs assessment is a very important part of that process. So we'll look at that today and what that means, how to clarify it. Okay. In ROMA, or results-oriented management and accountability, there is a cycle of activities that we perform, and we are putting this in the assessment category. So community assessment happens at the very front end of any of our planning activities, because we need to know exactly what people need. We'll define what people means here in a minute, and then get prepared to plan with that information. So we'll kind of put a pin in this at the end of it and know that we're going to be using this data for the planning process. Okay, so what's an assessment? What is this community needs assessment? First, it is the process that we use to create a profile of the existing needs and resources in our community or target population. Okay, so the second item of that is that we use this process to produce a clear description of the specific causes and conditions of poverty. That language is very important because it's used in the planning process itself. And then the third thing is that it takes into consideration the existing resources in the community, and we'll learn why that's important here in just a second. But it allows us to know when there are gaps in the community as a good reason to perform the assessment. So what's the purpose? What do we use this for? Well, one thing is that it helps us to focus our resources on the things that are unique to our community, the population that we serve. The second thing is that it allows us to avoid overlapping too heavily, so that we're not applying duplicated services and kind of using resources where they don't need to be used if someone else is already performing that task in the community. Okay, and we can partner better, use our resources more smartly. All right. So what do we mean by the community? Well, when we are doing the assessment, we know that we've got a community, a target community that we anticipate assisting directly, but we also want to look at the overall community so we can establish what kind of impact our work is having on the community at large, right? So very important as we're going through this assessment process that we're not just including information about the low-income community, but that we've got a reference point for the rest of the community. Okay, so who's involved? Well, the board does start to get involved in a way in the assessment process. So the way that may look is, particularly when you're forming a team, the assessment team, that often will include board members and or a committee of board members that are intended to focus on community assessment. And then when you are pulling that team together, it's important to identify the role that each person will play, just so you know who's collecting what information and how they're supporting the process. All right, there are several parts to the assessment itself, and we'll go through most of these here in this presentation. So we're going to be identifying the appropriate quantitative data, so stats, numbers, counts, that sort of thing. We'll be gathering qualitative data, so those are the things that tell us more about the level of importance based on people's perspective. We'll be looking at agency data, existing agency data, and what data we can use in our planning process. Understanding what resources and assets are in the community, and then also looking at customer satisfaction data as we look at agency needs. And as a quick reminder, and this is right in the ROMA logo that you can see in the bottom right of every one of these slides, the ROMA logo includes the words family, agency, and community. That's what's in those circles. So whenever we talk about community in terms of ROMA and community action, we think of, in reality, three different things. So there is the community that we serve. We look a little deeper into the families and individuals that make up that community. And then we also look at our agency itself and the needs of the agency to support that community. So the data that we are gathering is really to look at all three of those categories of need. Okay, so the first area that we can look at for collecting information or data is quantitative data. So we're looking at statistics and how they're presented. Okay. One area to go is at the Community Commons. That's communitycommons.org, all one word. And you can use that website to research and draw out information about communities using maps based on zip code, right? So you can find information about where there's high levels of poverty concentration, where there's food deserts, using the information there that people are not directly responding to surveys. You can actually access this not just for the low-income community, but for the community at large, like we mentioned before. Okay, and including pulling directly out of these websites the graphics and images that they use to illustrate this data is also very helpful. It saves a lot of time to be able to grab those graphical depictions of information as you're able to customize and filter what's relevant to your community and the geographies that you're serving. Okay. A way that can look is pulling direct images, kind of doing some screenshotting. Another way to approach this is looking at what's available for distribution on social media. So a lot of, like, for instance, here on the slide here, we've got the Census Bureau, which offers some media-ready inserts, right, to demonstrate particular levels of need within the community, or those little levers, so particular areas of need within a community. And then graphs obviously are pretty helpful. So the existing ones. Now you can take all of these and put them into your own format if that makes more sense. And sometimes that does, particularly if you're comparing data from across multiple websites and it just kind of doesn't gel well. You can reproduce these, but if it's already available, you may as well take advantage. Right. Thank you, Andy. Andy dropped a Community Commons link in the chat. All right, so a couple of things that we should ask ourselves. So first, in sorting the quantitative data, how do these various data points interconnect? Okay, so we're looking for commonalities that are across different data points. So looking at intersections of poverty and education, as a for instance, health indicators in poverty, and also housing patterns, low-income communities. So taking the different elements that we pay attention to and cross-referencing them can start to expose areas of the community that we may not have seen before, or identify shifts in the community over time. Okay, I'll pause here before we move on to qualitative. Do you have any questions about what we mean by quantitative data or the sources that we use? Or do you have any other examples of data sources that you've used in the past that you'd like to contribute to that? It's okay to come off mute if you'd like to add that verbally.
I like to use the censusreporter.org, because you can get a lot of different information, county specific.
Nice,
I
fantastic.
get a lot of charts and graphs from there as well.
All right. It's a good example. Karen adds the U.S. Census data profiles are helpful. Okay. You also see on CSD's website, they've got some available links for data, and through NASCASP or NASCASP.org also has some data gathering tools.
Okay. I'm trying to find some of my other ones because I have them all bookmarked.
All right. Well, if you are able to send those after this call, I'll be sending out a recording. So any links that you can provide to me beforehand, I will redistribute to anybody who's receiving the notification. And we'll also see how we'll collect additional quantitative data out of our own agency data, but we'll save that here for a second. Now, one thing that helps us to shape the quantitative data that we receive is qualitative data. So by qualitative data, we're really asking for particular narrative description on why things are the way that they are, why a particular need is important. It helps us to provide a little bit of context as to the level of need that this is in the community and the impacts that may go outside of that core need. So if someone's identifying a need for higher levels of employment or higher levels of education, there may be other contributing factors to why that is, and we can suss that out. Okay. All right. It's helpful to ask your customers to identify their own needs, and that is going to help you drill down to a family or individual level for needs. It's also important to ask the customers the impact on the community at large. So from their perspective, how do the community's needs impact the individual, and what's their perspective on the impact to the community itself? Okay, and that can very much help with community level needs and defining those more clearly. All right. So we get input from all aspects of our community, right? So we'll look at the general public, policymakers at the largest level, and then pull it into human services providers. So kind of looking into our industry, our world, and our level of support that we provide the community on a whole. What are other human services providers in the area doing right now? What needs are they addressing? What services are they providing? A little tighter in, we're looking at the businesses that help support the community. Those are the employers in the community. Those are the support services that are available in the community. We'll look at members of other organizations, so whether we're directly tied to them or not. So you can think of this if, for instance, if you run Head Start or another member-based organization in the same agency, then we can look at the membership of those groups as part of the needs gathering process. And then at the core here, we can look at our own customers and their needs as we ask them directly on an ongoing basis, or at time to time, like when we release a customer-wide survey. Okay. So we're going to take all of that that data that we're gathering, right? The qualitative and quantitative data, all the numbers and the stories, and we start to pull that together to analyze the data, to identify what the actual needs are that are coming out of it. Some of them are very obvious because they're stated. Others of them are, well, less obvious, and we need to pull them together. Or it's a combination of needs that we're starting to see trends in, so we can start to address things, well, with the resources that we have and the resources in the community. Okay. This also helps us to identify opportunities for leveraging partners, particularly if you've got new groups popping up on the scene that are providing services and you want to engage with them. So understanding what their services are all about, and then how that may benefit your customers, whether it's in a case management scenario or even just walk in to be a center point in the community. Okay. So as we're looking at all of this stuff, we have to think about the agency's capacity to meet those needs. We're already starting to identify that. Now, we're really going to fully analyze the agency's capacity to deliver services later on when you get into planning. But at the data collection stage, we want to be cognizant of what the agency's existing situation is, because if we want to expand services, get into something new, we have to know where we are today, right? What are the stresses on the agency today? What services do we offer? And looking at the evaluation of those services, ostensibly we're doing annual reporting, looking into the success of programs and identifying where we may modify things, right? So you may identify increasing or decreasing the level of service. You may eliminate a program to open up another. There's all sorts of decisions that need to be made. As board members, you help to have an influence on the interface that you have with the community, right? So you're one of the liaisons between the agency and then the needs of the community. So it's helpful to know from that perspective the impact that the community sees the agency having. And then as we move forward, how we'll prioritize which needs we're going to address, kind of based on what we're doing now, the success of those programs, and then the urgency of any new needs that are cropping up in the community and how we may approach that, right? Okay. Another thing that will come out of assessing the community's needs and the agency's needs in particular is the level of participation in the community action board. And every agency is different, every board is different. Okay, but this is an opportunity to assess the capacity of the board. Right. So does the board capacity align with maybe the future needs of the community, right? Sometimes you want to infuse like a new expertise or skill into the board and may take advantage of upcoming openings or some other way address the composition of the board based on the needs assessment. Okay. Or reveal things. As goals to be met in the community action plan. Fiscal data is obviously going to be important as you're pulling things together for the planning process. So it's going to be important to include in the assessment prior year fiscal reporting, agency-wide fiscal reporting, and then audits, the reports and the responses to those. And then looking at this year's finances and what next year's finances will hold or what you anticipate receiving, what opportunities are there to either carry over funds or find other unencumbered amounts that may be available for programming in the following year. This is where you get the creativity aspect of, what are our resources when you're analyzing the agency's existing resources. Okay. Another pool of data that we can use is customer satisfaction data. It's going to answer those questions of how the agency is doing from the customer's perspective and in particular programs. And then it also helps identify what are the needs of the agency. There was a pretty interesting effect that happened when we looked at the idea of scarcity at agencies. And there was a brief study that was done a few years back that invited customers to provide comment on agencies and what, from their perspective, were the needs of the agency. And you would be surprised at how clearly and succinctly your customers can start to point out what they perceive as inconsistencies or opportunities for the agencies to improve service delivery. Sometimes it's as easy as pointing out like a this then that, like a procedural flaw that just causes a lot of back and forth, and the agency may not be aware of the situation. Right? Customers can point that out. In any case, customer satisfaction data is what you would use to partially assess that. Okay. When you're looking at service delivery, collecting that data is hugely important because then it tells you where there may be gaps in that service delivery. Okay, so it can tell you both from a programmatic level, or if you've got challenges in capacity to deliver those services within the organization, and maybe an indicator of training. Could be something of an agency need that the customers point out. Okay. Also identifying, asking them if it helped them and how did it help them. That's an impact. That's a result or an outcome that we can start measuring against the needs that we've collected. All right. Okay. When it comes to resources and assets, we want to look both internally and externally. So we want to know what is already available, what takes stock of what the agency is currently doing and identifying any gaps internally. And then remembering that we're pulling community resources too. So when you go out to seek what other services are being offered in the community and by whom, that data can then be used to help fill some of those gaps, right? Telling you what services are already there so we can avoid duplication, identifying opportunities for partnership, and even ways that we may be able to stabilize or in some ways enhance the services of a partner. All right. So we'll ask these few questions here. So what resources are available already to meet the needs that you're finding? So who's already out there doing certain work in the community as you see it pop up in the needs assessment? Where are they located? As you know, the geographies aren't always convenient for access to services, especially if transportation is a challenge or just the distance between service areas can cause challenges. So that can be revealed here. And then are the services themselves easily accessible? So not just the distance that they are away from you, but any other access challenges that may be there. The data that we collect should help us or should inform us on whether those gaps exist or if there are barriers for customers to reach our services. We may have a great program on paper that wasn't performing well last year, and this can be a way of identifying why it is that it wasn't performing as expected, particularly pointed to how accessible those services are to the community or the customers that we intend to serve. Okay. All right. So next thing that we do after we collect all of the data is to start the process of making information out of that data, which means prioritizing the information and filtering it, categorizing it in a way that makes it useful. Okay. We need to ask the data question. So the art of analysis or analyzing data is really asking questions of the data. Like you're using that as a resource. So you want to be able to answer things like what do you want to know and why do you want to know it? That data is going to help clear it up, but not only that, it's your proof. Right. So it really illustrates to the funders, in this case, CSD in particular, how those services meet the needs of the community. And then how it is that you're going to prioritize those needs so that the funding that you have will adequately meet the needs to your expectations. Right. You don't want to get spread too thin. Just because you know all the needs does not mean that we necessarily have the bandwidth to address them all in the community. So by prioritizing, what we're saying is we see that these will have the largest impact, then this is how we know that, right? So we need to ask the data that, right? Like how is it that this is going to make an impact on the community? And then we translate it into the plan. Okay, and then we've got the numbers to back it up. It will also help us prioritizing our targets, right? So we're not going to get into targeting here. That's a function of the planning. But this is the first stage of that. So this is giving us the data that we need when we start calculating what our targets will be for the impacts that we're going to make in the community. This idea of a needs statement is part of a significant part of ROMA. It's kind of where a logic model begins. So after we've identified the mission of the organization, we're looking at the needs as statements of need from individuals, statements of need from the community, and statements of need from the agency itself as we move into the plan. And then that way we can say, yes, we are working toward addressing this need. And the rest of the planning process says, yes, this is how we're going to address the need. But at this point, we want to very clearly define what that need is. There will be many. There will be many. And they can also lump it up into groupings of needs. The more clearly and succinctly you can define each need within those three areas, the easier the planning process becomes, because you've got more to work with and to define the outcomes that you're expecting. All right. Prioritizing need, we talked about this just a little bit ago. Few points. Obviously the agency does not have unlimited resources, so we need to be clear about which programs we're going to operate and be fiscally responsible. Second thing is that sometimes the issue that raises to the top is something that the agency had not been addressing. It could be something new. Think about how the pandemic had massive shifts in the need of the community all of a sudden, right? We didn't have an opportunity really to plan for that early on. That affected us, right?
Mm-hmm.
Andy, what do you think?
Yeah, I think like for us, one of the things that's really come up as a result of the pandemic is mental health.
Yes.
And then substance abuse issues, which aren't typically areas that our community action board addresses. And then also the youth aging out of foster care and the need for housing. We have been addressing the need for housing, but not foster youth specific. So those are kind of fall into some of these categories.
Yeah, those are really important examples. And if I had to add a third, I would keep an eye on the effects of climate change. If we need it, like this past year has been a real eye opener in a lot of ways as to how that has hidden impacts, and we're learning about it now.
Yes.
Right. Deanna, you had a comment?
Yeah, similarly, we've noticed there are there are two overarching needs that have come up with the latest assessment, one of which has been kind of in the background, and one of them is new. The one that's been in the background has been housing, but it's been more centered around homelessness, and yet the rising costs of housing are making that one of the most critical needs. Similarly, a new need has been around internet access and access to both available and affordable internet. And I think the pandemic really brought more and more of this to light, not only with all of these streaming services that everything is on, but we moved in that much stronger a remote work world, a remote personal world with the pandemic and the ability to do things electronically that we used to do in person. So but in both cases, there are sometimes very large agencies that are working towards these efforts. So I like what you were saying is we also have to look at where there are resources that are already focusing large amounts of money, and where does it make sense that we supplement with something that perhaps isn't being addressed, maybe with information sharing, resource knowledge sharing in the community about available resources, as opposed to trying to develop something new.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is a real good reason why to have relationships in the community with other agencies. And as board members, that really is the beauty of the tripartite board, is to be able to have that reach right in the board, let alone like having to get out into the community to ask that question. But leveraging the experience and the input of the board is a great place to start in helping that prioritization process. Developing relationships through board interactions, through the senior director of the agency providing outreach and doing that work is a great way of identifying where those resource partners can be. So when you do see that the priority of the community may be outside of the mission of the agency, it may just not fall within our wheelhouse to provide the support, but it could very well be that we engage with another organization that does and grow that in and meet the need of the community. It's really awesome the way that works out. Then guess what? We get to take credit for it. Okay, because we were the reason why that happened. CSBG made that happen. So think of it that way. Like we're sort of an enabler of positivity in our community and building and structuring and fighting poverty. That's the way it happens, right? Not just because the Community Action Agency is there, but because we're there and engaging all of the partners as best we can in the community and playing that point role. Cool. Thank you for that feedback. Those are great additions. In setting priorities, this is cool. The role of leadership is to transform the complex situation into small pieces and prioritize them, right? So that's what we're doing. When we go through this process, we're looking at the grand landscape of things and then chunking it down into what we can do, and then what we can affect, okay? So as boards and as advisors to the agency, it is a critical role of the board to help make sense of this all, right? And to ensure that the ship is moving in the direction that the community needs it to go. All right. A couple of things about identifying a need is a lot of times we'll look at through the lens of the service, what the need is. So thinking of housing as a need is a broad need. It's difficult to affect housing in general. So remembering the quote on the earlier slide, we've got to chunk that down into pieces. So what about housing, right? More specifically, so we can approach the need instead of having it be a broad stroke. So if we want to break that down, we need to start asking what about housing is important to the people that need it, so we can start affecting the underlying needs of housing, whether that's on a one-by-one or individual support basis, Or does that mean that we need to go at a community level and start advocating for more access to services, more access to housing, more access to other important community element needs like healthcare and childcare and transportation, et cetera? Okay. Andy, did you have a thought?
No, I just had somebody come in and ask me a question, so I'm trying to figure out where we are.
That's okay. Yeah,
But
this
I'm also looking at like what it says when, because I'm going to be doing the community needs assessment. So making sure that I understand how to verbalize the need within the document. So
That's
I
right.
like this example that you have here. You know, don't just say, yeah, it's a top need, but explaining why and making it a little bit more broad, because that helps the people that are reviewing our community action plan to have a better understanding of the needs at a local level.
Yeah, you explained that very well, Andy. And this is an exercise that we go through in the introduction to ROMA course with staff at the agency. So particularly when we're working with folks that are developing these plans. So just like Andy was saying, you know, that process, we spend some time just identifying how to articulate the need, right? How do you put it in words that make sense in the planning process? I mean, we can conceptualize the need, that's fine. But sometimes the words are important in how we take it from a need and then take it all the way to solving the need or providing an outcome or result that addresses that need. And then we can connect the dots. So the biggest reason why we're so sensitive to that in the front end is because it affects how well we can say we either met or did not meet the needs of the community, individuals, or the agency. And that's not necessarily a bad thing if we don't meet the need. It's more data, because guess what? We're going to pull that from last year, right? We're going to, or the last cycle, 2-year cycle, and say, yeah, okay, well, we expected this to happen. It didn't. There's a gap. Now we're going to analyze why that is, and we're going to see if in the next planning cycle that's still a need that we need to address. And then that becomes an agency need to address that in process. And then however it pans out, if it was community, agency, or individual. Okay. So yeah, just know that as board, you should be on the receiving end of this, of Andy's hard work. Okay, Andy and her colleagues' hard work of identifying those needs and laying it out for you as board members to say, yeah, I recognize that. I can see where these services that we're suggesting we're going to offer will meet those needs. And that's really what's important, right? If the services that you're offering do not seem to match the needs of the community, that's a red flag, you know? And that's why we have ROMA trainers, professionals look over the plan, the submitted community action plan prior to approving it, because we want to ensure that those things match, that the needs match the services, and that the services will result in the outcomes that address the needs. Okay, so it's simple math at that level, but it takes some real deep understanding and analysis of what's going on in the community to make it make sense on the plan when you review it and approve it. Okay. Cool. Okay. What do we have next? Taking action. All right. So we'll strive to have an agency-wide comprehensive CNA, or you also hear this called a community strengths and needs assessment. I like that terminology just a little bit better, because it really does help to identify what is existing in the community, in addition to what's needed in the community. And then we'll have the board approve that CNA as a board action, right? So please, please, please be sure that that happens. If that hasn't happened already, it will be happening soon because of our cycle, right? And with the plans coming up, the full plan will be due at the end of June. So along the way, this is when these approvals happen. And in talking to each of the agencies that I've talked to, we're kind of in the midst of that now. So the March, April timeframe is where I'm hearing a lot of these activities for the community needs assessment are being completed and then ultimately approved by boards. Deanna.
Hi, yes. This is my first year in the position and my first cycle going through it. I know that the deadline is June 30th. Are there any opportunities for extension if needed?
Probably not. That's because it's a roll up, but that is an excellent question for your field rep, your CSD field rep, because they're going to be guiding that process and they should be pretty
Okay, thank you.
communicative
I
about
did.
that. Yeah,
I
okay.
did submit the question, so I will work with Patrick. Thank you.
And Deanna, if you don't hear back, we'll help support that. We'll get some answers too.
Obviously, we
see
understand the importance of the deadlines. I get it, but you're right. Especially being a public agency, we have also our board of supervisors requires the approval, and the timelines are such that I need to be able to express that as we emphasize the importance of expediting certain approvals and all those kinds of things. It helps to understand, because that question does come up sometimes.
Absolutely. And David Knight just posted in the chat here too. We've got a meeting with CSD coming up. So we'll bring that up to them about communicating out those deadlines. I think that they also have a calendar of that on their service provider portal. So you may check there for additional support, but yeah, we'll it shouldn't be hard to figure out, Okay. Other actions, if you have not done so already, you want to be sure that we've identified a planning committee that's going to take all of this information and form it into the community action plan. And also use data that you may have from a local theory of change. If you have not performed that process of creating a local theory of change, consider doing that over the next either several months or in the next cycle. Okay, because having that map, having that guide light is a nice rally point. It is also great when you're talking to your community partners to illustrate how we see it through the community action lens, moving the community in the direction it wants to go, in the forward direction that it wants to go. Okay. Cool. I'd like to see that last slide. All right. So that's the end of our content. I'd like to open up for any questions that you have about the community needs assessment process, or if you have any success stories or techniques that you like to use that you'd like to share with the group. Good time to add that. Of course, David Knight. This is going to come off camera. I'm sure you got a couple things to add.
Yeah, the only thing I was going to say there on the end, the standards say the community assessment, the governing board or the advisory board formally accepts the completed community assessments. One of the things I always make on board conversations like this, that it's really good in the language to have that they're accepting the community needs assessment versus approving the needs assessment. And most of the time people will take both, but I think it's very important that we say that, because the board can't come in and say, well, we want to change the need assessment. They can accept what was presented and show the fact that they were presented it, but approving it, tends to say that they have the power to change it. Well, you can't go and change the data. You can change some of the summary or the things, and the plan, the community action plan, is totally different. But when we talk about the needs assessment specifically in that ROMA cycle, just some wording, I think that helps. That helps folks for make sure that we don't confuse operations with board, governance. And so I just want to throw that out there as well.
Thanks, David. Okay.
Hello, I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a staff member, and this is my first time working with the community needs assessment. So I was wondering if there are any resources for customer satisfaction questions that we can look at.
Oh yeah. Well, there's we'll start with the American Customer Service Index. That's more of a standardized customer feedback that typically goes out once a year. I think that's run by an association that does the surveying, and they're across multiple industry. All right. But for regular customer satisfaction, sure, we've got some examples around. I don't know, David, do you have any from past
Yeah, I'll pull it up, see if I can drop it in the chat right now. Karen, I have one that I used to use. And I can share the policy that we used to have around it. And then we just had a brief, almost postcard like, 3 questions. So I'll see if I can pull that up real quick and drop it in here.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, David.
Lawrence, what did you say that was? The America's what?
Customer Satisfaction Index, ACSI. You'll hear that a lot too, because it's something that the network pays attention to at a national level. And each agency is kind of subject to being assessed through that survey.
Okay,
Yeah, ACSI.
here it is, America's Customer Satisfaction Index.
Yeah, you hear people call it the ASCII, even though the C and
Uh-huh.
the are twisted, but whatever, it's hard to pronounce ASCII. So
Yeah, I know that we have attached to all of our applications a satisfaction form that the clients can fill out and include when they submit an application. But I
mhm.
think we're working towards trying to, gather as many client emails as we can. So after they get service, we can send them something for follow-up after as well.
Sure. Yeah. In past work that I've done with other organizations, they've leaned pretty heavily on Net Promoter Score as an option. So you may look into that. There's a book called The Ultimate Question that describes how that plays out. And you'll see NPS. NPS is the acronym you'll see all over the place for Net Promoter Score. But NPS is it's a fast survey. So you get a lot of data with NPS. And you can add on to that survey as needed. Kind of depends on what your goal is with the output.
So is that Net Promoter Score? Is that what you said?
Yes, Net Promoter Score. It's also baked into SurveyMonkey. So they've got a Net Promoter Score calculator if you use SurveyMonkey. But it's very common. It's been around for, I don't know, close to 20 years now.
Okay.
As a tool. So have a peek at that, but ultimately the survey should give you the data that you need to make the plan happen, right? So, it's kind of sometimes can be specific to the type of service because you want to know how well that service is meeting the need of the person using it. So however you want to divine that information, that's the way the questions will go. And Karen, I see you're at Kern, right?
Yes.
Okay. So, and I understand Kern runs a lot of programs. So may ask internally as well, what folks have been using in the past, if they like the data that comes out of that, if it's usable data from satisfaction surveys that have been used already.
Awesome. So I can look at program managers for that.
Absolutely. Yep. Okay. All right. Do we have any other questions or clarifications that we can offer? And David, I can go ahead and post whatever material you find with the recording here as well. So yeah, no problem there. Okay, and we'll attach our own survey and how you liked our the presentation today. Okay, well, good. Well, I'm happy to say that I can give you maybe 10 minutes of lunch back. All right.
All right. Well, thank you.
You're welcome. And next month, we'll be doing another session. Next time we'll be on the strategic planning process. Okay, so.
You have a date for that?
I sure do.
Yeah, because I'd like to get that
May have a
information out
link.
to we have a bunch of new board members and especially our officers. So. And strategic.
Strategic planning, April 25th is when that's coming.
4/25.
Yep, and
Okay, I can get that on the CalCappa website.
I just dropped, yes, and I dropped the link to that in the
Oh, perfect.
chat.
I will
So,
grab
yeah,
that.
you can find that on our
Look
training
it on my
calendar.
calendar.
Yeah.
Was there an advertisement that went out about registering for that? I'd love to forward that to our advisory board members.
It's fresh off the press, Deanna. So
Lovely.
not
Lovely.
just, yeah, but I wanted to share with this group because you attended this one. But yes, we'll release it. It just hasn't been announced yet.
Perfect timing. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Great.
Oh,
I
good.
will get that out to them as well.
Okay. Cool, folks. Well, thank you for joining us. And maybe we'll see you next month. And certainly we'll see you at another Cal Kappa event.
All right.
Thanks very much.
Thanks.
All right. Have a great afternoon.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.